Now, rebels are continuing to seize territory in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo and are now advancing towards another mineral-rich area. The United Nations says that across North Kivu province, hundreds of thousands of displaced families are in urgent need of assistance. In the meantime, the US has been holding what's been described as exploratory talks with the DRC over a deal that would give it access to the African nation's critical minerals in exchange for military support. The DRC has extended the offer, proposing exclusive access to its critical minerals and infrastructure projects. In return, the DRC is seeking security assistance to combat the M23 rebellion. In a direct appeal over the weekend, the DRC requested an urgent meeting between President Felix Tshisekedi and US President Donald Trump. Well, for analysis of the latest developments in the DRC, I'm joined now on the line from London by the former British diplomat and former director of the Royal African Society, Dr. Nicholas Westcott, who served as the European Union's managing director for Africa. He's currently a professor of practice in diplomacy at the SOAS Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy at the University of London. Professor Westcott, thank you so much for joining us. I wonder what more you know or you've heard about these exploratory talks between the DRC and the US, and how much of a surprise is the news?
It's not a tremendous surprise. The US has expressed interest in the DRC's, the Congo's mineral wealth, and concern that a lot of it was in the hands of the Chinese. So there's definitely a geostrategic identity of interest there. If the DRC wishes to diversify its supply, it's also desperately in need of allies, given that its forces are in retreat in the face of the advancing rebels, M23, allegedly backed by Rwanda. So they think that this offer of a carrot to the US might help provide them with a stick to counter the continued advances of M23 in the east, and give the US an interest in maintaining Congo's territorial integrity and the minerals that it currently contains, rather than letting them fall into the hands of either rebels or Rwanda.
And I mean, is it clear yet how official these talks are?
No, they are still exploratory. Clearly, the Congolese would like them to become a lot more official, hence the official request you mentioned from President Tshisekedi to meet President Trump, which, if the US decide this could be a useful geostrategic play, could happen quite quickly if Trump chose. But I think they will be a little bit wary. They still don't have an assistant secretary for Africa. Peter Pham has been talked of as the person to fulfill that role, but is not yet in post. On the other hand, President Trump nominated yesterday, I think, his son-in-law's father to become the envoy to the DRC. His name is Massad Boulos, and his son is the husband of one of Donald Trump's daughters. So he is a businessman. His main expertise is in the Middle East, but it suggests that rather as Witkoff has become Trump's main spokesperson and negotiator in the Middle East, Mr. Boulos might become the same, in which case the whole objective is to cut deals. And the Congolese know that. They're offering Trump a deal. Our minerals for you, security for us. We'll see whether that is sufficiently attractive to the US to bring them running. Problem is, still, it would require the US to encourage some of its mining companies. There are no US mining companies at the moment in the DRC. Who is going to get these minerals? The US government doesn't have mining companies, unlike the Chinese. They can send a mining company in tomorrow if requested. So it's a slightly more complicated deal, perhaps, than it looks on paper. Meantime, the rebels are advancing, and Tshisekedi is sounding increasingly desperate to get more international support.
that's a very good point you made there about the fact that the US doesn't actually have companies that are there or are willing to necessarily to go there. But I mean, you talked about cutting deals. I mean, that's become sort of the watchword of Donald Trump. I mean, when the DRC talks about critical minerals, I'm wondering what they are and how attractive that would be to the United States.
The main ones of interest to the United States are things like copper, cobalt, lithium. What is mainly available in the Northeast, where the M23 are active, is gold. And this gold seems to be transiting through Rwanda to the UAE, and is a very useful supply of cash. The town to which the rebels are heading, Walikale, in somewhat to the west of Goma, apparently has a number of rare earths and more valuable international minerals. That is of interest to the US. They don't want to see it all fall into hands that would direct it all to China. But this transactional world in which we now belong, in some ways, President Kagame of Rwanda has been the quickest off the mark to realize that without a US guarantor to preserve borders throughout the world, people who can take what they want.
But of course, obviously we don't know what the deal would be like, but perhaps the DRC would be wise to limit its expectations from any such cooperation with the US.
Yes, I see what Tshisekedi thinks he can do. And as I say, it is a carrot. It is geostrategic. This is part of the play with China. I think we know the Trump administration is concerned about that. But whether there's enough in it to divert US government resources, which are heavily engaged elsewhere with Ukraine, with Gaza, his disputes with Canada, with Panama, Mexico, I'm not sure this will get high enough up the White House agenda for Trump to say, yes, let's do a deal with DRC. We'll wait to see.
And of course, the minerals that are being extracted at the moment, I mean, beyond the ones that are sort of crossing the border into Rwanda, presumably they're going to places like China. I mean, how do you get rid of the Chinese?
Yeah, and a lot of these are being mined by relatively reputable Western mining companies like Glencore. But quite a lot of the trade is in the hand of Chinese companies. And in principle, all these minerals are on the world market, but a lot of it is sewn up by the Chinese dealers who make sure that it heads off east. The West is not short of these critical minerals. They can still get the ones they need to make mobile phones, to make armaments. But there is a risk that should there be a more conflictual situation, it would get harder for them to do that. Hence the interest in ensuring they have got some geostrategic control over the supplies.
Is it your sense that the inspiration for this move by the DRC is Ukraine, basically, and that mineral deal that the US has been insisting upon with the Ukrainians? I mean, was that the template for the DRC, do you think?
I think they're inspired by it. I wouldn't say the Ukraine example has been terribly successful for Ukraine up to now, but they have correctly identified that Donald Trump likes deals. He likes deals that involve either real estate, not a lot of prospect for that in DRC for Trump, and minerals, strategic minerals in particular. So they've correctly identified, and they've had lobbyists working with them, for them in Washington, D.C., who speak regularly to the Trump administration and know that this could be of interest to them. So they've made an offer. We'll see whether it's picked up and whether the US think this is a good offer. We want to follow it up, in which case what DRC will want in return, as I say, is some not security guarantees in the same way that Ukraine needs them, but political support in their fight against the M23 and their rivalry with Rwanda.
And of course, there's no guarantee that even if a deal is agreed between the US and the DRC, the conflict will end, because of course, in addition to the military conflict, I mean, there's a whole political quagmire there, isn't there?
I suppose if the conflict in Ukraine can be brought to a ceasefire, at least, that would free up some Russian troops perhaps to fly to the DRC. We might see it's no longer the Wagner group. I think they're called the Africa Corps, but they're under Kremlin direction. Russian soldiers appearing in the DRC to fight Rwanda. Now that would be quite escalatory, and I think even the Russians might hesitate to step into that quagmire. But, you know, we've seen before in the 1990s, DRC became effectively an Africa-wide war with the South Africans, the Angolans, the Rwandans, the Ugandans, Burundians, all getting involved. I think we should make big efforts as an international community, and that includes the US, to avoid that happening again.
And that's very good advice. And one final question. I mean, in addition, of course, to all this, one suspects that the M23 rebels, who seem to be powering through the DRC and are now holding both Goma and Bukavu and going deeper into the country, won't take this lightly, will they?
No, and the leader of the M20, the political leader of the M23, Nanga, has hinted that he wants to go all the way to Kinshasa, that he sees this, as in the 1990s, an opportunity to overturn the Congolese government. That is extremely worrying to President Tshisekedi because it has happened before. And he knows his own army has not been very effective in containing the M23, let alone pushing them back. So there is a serious concern there. But on the other hand, I am not convinced that Rwanda, as backers of the M23, really want to take responsibility again for overturning the established order in the DRC and precipitating a wider conflict. That could be costly for them. At the moment, my estimate is that Rwanda will extend its influence as far into DRC through the M23 as it can, secure the minerals that it can, but then call a stop. But you never know. Things have taken us by surprise in the past. They might again.
Indeed. I want to thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate your analysis there. Dr. Nicholas Westcott is a British diplomat and former director of the Royal African Society. He served as the European Union's managing director for Africa and is currently a professor of practice in diplomacy at the SOAS Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy at the University of London. Thank you very much indeed.